Aloha. Yeah, that's exactly the way to put it, flow states or yeah, that best state that you can be in, yeah, of performance. Yeah, that's a great right, that's a great question. They're also known as peak states, but they were given that name by, Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. He just died in October, in fact. Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi is a psychologist and a behavioral specialist, and I believe I can't recall now, but he's a professor in a Midwestern university. Anyway, um, he studied flow states, and he got that name because when you're in your best state of performance, things are flowing. Um, jazz musicians knew it as being in the pocket. You're in the zone. Time stands still. Anybody who's performing, a concert pianist, everything's just perfect. Any sports performance, where time is just irrelevant. Either it speeds up or it slows down, but say a basketball rim looks as wide as a pool. When you're running, it's effortless. All focus is on the event itself, and everything seems to be easy. When you're writing, you're on one of those days when you're writing, and it just from the brain to the pen to the paper, it's everything you want to say and how you want to say it. It's that moment when you're performing and everything just seems to be clicking, a flow state, and there's a reason for it. There's a neurochemical reason for it. There's a neuroelectric reason for it, and it's also the apex of your experience and your performance. And in those moments, not only is it those culmination of things, it's also where you learn best. And I actually kind of tripped upon flow states by running, and by running I was meditating in a way. And then years later I found out that this is actually a state of mind. Excuse me. And then I started investigating through the Flow Genome Project of Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel, because this is a thing that came about in the 20th century. Um, then they started studying behavior, and they found out through psychology at first, and then they started studying the biomechanics of all the things that are going on inside us electrically and chemically. This is actually a physiological state as well. It's called flow state. Um, it's pretty fascinating. Everyone's been there. Everyone knows about it. Yeah. Question? Mhm, mhm. That is exactly a flow state. That's one of the characteristics of a flow state, that you lose track of time. You become integrated into the moment so well, the focus is so there that nothing else matters. And you become focused, your abilities are at such a level that you are at the peak of your challenge and your skill. By which I mean that you're on a sort of a scale, a two-level scale, whereas you're ascending upward, no XY scale, and on one side you have the challenge. The challenge is high enough that you are not bored, and yet you are not full of anxiety. Say if you were going to jump off a cliff and do a dive, you're at a height whereby you're not so freaked out that you cannot perform, and yet you're at a level where it's just not just another dive. You're at a level where it's a challenge, and it's gonna take all of your focus to perform that, and when you execute that, you are at that point where the challenge is high enough and your skills will meet it plus a little more. It's gonna take a little higher level of focus because the consequence is a little higher than usual. There are certain triggers that need to be in place for flow. And one of those things that demands, like when you were losing that much track of time, you had a consequence that was pretty high, whether it was self imposed or external, intrinsic, intrinsic or extrinsic. A consequence, well, for one thing, oh, okay, everyone, let's say Free Solo, the film that just came out, whereby, oh, geez, I'm looking at the guy's face and I can't think of his name, but geez, I mean, I think of the guy all the time. He free soloed El Capitan. He did it without ropes. He did it. People would think he was crazy for doing it. The thing is, he prepares for it so much. It's his thing. It's what he does. He climbed that thing multiple times with ropes. He even climbed multiple times without ropes, but he never put it all together. The day that he did it, he he did it in one fell swoop in 4.5 hours. To him, it was a flow state. He was focused. The consequence was high for him, especially in about six different crux points. If he fell, he would have died, but he had all the confidence in the world that he wouldn't because his focus was intense. The consequence was high, and he just had the ability to do it. And so for him, it was a rush. Yeah. Mhm. Correct, yeah, his name is Alex Honnold, I just got it back, yeah, and Alex is such a good climber, and he'd rehearsed it so often, and it was such an ideal of his, he'd looked at this climb for so long, that the day he'd actually done it, he just was ready for it, and he did it, and it was a flow state he did it in, and he had rehearsed it. He knew how to do it. So to the mere mortal, we're going, "What are you crazy?" But to him, it was the apex of his skill and the challenge of the climb. And that day, it was just the perfect focus. And if you do think about these things and you think about the triggers that are involved, it's a high consequence maneuver. It took all of his focus. It took an intense amount of his skill plus some because it was so rich in experience. That's another thing. It's a rich environment. Obviously, the exposure of looking down and seeing 1,200 feet of nothing. The risk was high. The familiarity. He was familiar with the route. It was a clear goal. It was creative. That's another goal or a target. The consequence was high. The feedback. Another thing about flow is the feedback has to be immediate. His feedback was immediate. Hold or no hold, forward, up, down, across. That's also another part. And the intense focused attention. These are all there's 17 flow triggers, but these are incredibly, incredibly integral to part of those. And, the rich environment, the deep embodiment. Yeah. Intense focused attention, clear goals, feedback. Yeah. That day he was just him and that rock. And 4.5 hours is some pretty amazing climbing. Yeah. It was flow state all the way. But it can also be done with paper mache. You lost track of time. It was rich. You were really into it. You were creating deep intent focus, obviously, because you looked up and went, "What? What's with the clock?" That's a big indicator. When you lose track of time, that's a flow state. That's also a great lesson, and that's why I enjoyed it, and that's why I like to bring it into teaching. You get lessons like that. Yeah. Mhm. Thanks. Oh, yeah, let's do that. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Mhm. Perfect. Oh, wow. Right. Yeah. Mhm. Right. Correct, yeah. Yeah, so you've got that, and it's fairly complicated, obviously, at this level, right? And for kids, let's say a 3rd grader, it would be a 3rd grade, yeah, for teaching appropriate 3rd grade level stuff. Yeah, correct. Yeah. Yeah, so if you screw it up, you're gonna know. Yeah. The color coding is the yeah. The blue is the initial approach to it all. Is this activity going to yeah, and the red would be, the degree by which you do it. So, the challenge skill ratio and would indicate, is it even gonna fit? Would you give a 3rd grader 7th grade material? No, because that would frustrate them no end. They wouldn't be able to achieve that or, I mean, or you obviously wouldn't try to, do anything like free solo if you hadn't the level of it. So that would be dangerous. Or and you wouldn't want to bore people either. You wouldn't want to be passing around um, an activity where it's just child's play, literally, to the children because they'd finish it, they'd be bored. They'd innovate activity, as you know, and you'd have a skill or a management problem. So the challenge and the skills have to be going up that XY scale. So yeah, the higher the consequence and the richer the environment, then of course the more involved the kids are. This is where it gets kind of difficult for some teachers. It takes a lot of work. You got to keep kids active. You got to keep them involved. You can't throw worksheets at kids and expect a consequence or a rich environment. Those are boring things. Yeah. 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 Excellent. Important stuff there. Mhm. I know. Yeah. Mhm. 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 Okay, so materials that you haven't used before, um, uh, something that would, be exotic, for example, with, art supplies, when it comes to, I don't know, historical research, let's use an exotic research tool, let's construct projects using a different sort of software that uses a different form of presentation. Um, let's innovate a form of presentation. Physically, let's a rich environment would be a rock wall. If you're building a rock wall, and for PE, that's a little bit different than the gym floor itself. Let's shoot baskets off of the mini trampoline, although that's a little dangerous. I might second guess that, but something a little bit more rich. Spice things up. And then, of course, if you're ascending up the way up scale, someone invented the wingsuit, within the last 60 years, I imagine. That made the environment just a little bit rich and the consequences a little higher. That's how you're spicing things up. It's also important to notice that with the immediate feedback, in the last, steps, that's also, context, making things relevant. It's important to do that as well with not only do you get that immediate feedback, but you gotta know why you're doing what you're doing. Um, yeah. Mhm. I like her. Mhm, mhm. Whew, okay. Oof, yeah. Mm, mm. Well, the first thing I can think of is given I'm assuming that the challenge skills ratio includes a fair musical comedy sort of, skill set. I would say let's make a musical. Um, yeah, I it may be bad, but failure is part of learning, and that's another part of it. The consequences are kinda high. It's pretty rich. We got music, costumes, characters. Heck, let's just make the characters I don't know, we can make them monsters for that matter. You know what I'm saying? We could really go crazy on this. We could do a Stephen Sondheim sort of takeoff on Hansel and Gretel. He did it himself with Into the Woods. I don't know, you know what I'm saying? So there we go. I hope they could do it. Yeah. Mm. Oh, well, make them do it. No. Yeah, make them do it. Yeah. Well, then it gets bigger because yeah, I would say personally, if I would get them, then I would like wring my hands in an evil way and give them a laugh. Like you've asked for it now. If you don't like my idea, then you've got to come up with an idea. All right. And so then that would be my activity would be okay. It's time for your idea. But I would guide them toward the rich experience and the challenge, and I would also be wise enough to know what they can and can't do, so that they're not trying to get themselves to do something that would be too high on the skills, and that they would be doing something that it's impossible or frustrating to do. And I wouldn't allow them to do something so painfully easy that they would be done in a few days and we'd be staring at the floor and I'd have classroom management problems. You know what I'm saying? No, not an option. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I do too, but I like it. Deep embodiment. No. Well, that is actually deep embodiment right there. You're actually sort of doing it. It's it's getting involved in the subject, and so what you did is you spiced up brainstorming to a different level. Yeah, which caused some concentration, honestly. Yeah. Those are there's two more flow triggers. That's when it starts to roll. What you did was you prompted me to say, "Well, what if we brainstorm or better yet, brain barf?" And to which I said, "Yeah, and let's make that also more involved and try to use that to get some flow going as well because the next steps are all yellow, and that's the actual process. There's two sort of factions to that process. There's individual flow, and then there's the ever elusive yet really satisfying group flow. And that's been known to happen, obviously. And you'll see a group flow thing occur in each and every championship that's ever been achieved. That just happens when a group of people get together and perform at that level. It's a deep embodiment, so they're all working together with a serious concentration. And then you get into that shared clear goals. The individual obviously will have the clear goal, but not the shared, the good communication. You know, so you're right. It's deep embodiment, and then gets the sheer that serious concentration. Let's brain barf and then pick the edible parts out with tweezers, and yeah, that gets you a visual, which gets you concentrating, which then would get you the goal of yeah, and then let's come up with an idea, then guys, and then if they're communicating, yeah, they might come up with that goal that will get you a better trigger. Uh, if they're better at it, you know. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Oh, yeah. Debate team, same thing. Yeah, yeah. Mhm, mhm. Or keep it from being kicked. Yeah, yeah, and everyone knows their role, and everyone's and yeah, and everyone knows how to do it, yeah. Mhm. Yeah, everyone knows that there's a win and a loss to be had, and everyone's focused on that win. And the higher you get, you know, the higher the consequence. If we lose this, then we could lose the championship or something, so the consequence is clearly high, sure, yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Mhm, yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, there's whole books, the Art of War by Sun Tzu. Yeah, know your enemy and know yourself, and you will be victorious in most battles. But yeah, and the team knows this. They know what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, almost unconsciously. Yeah, debate teams, swim teams, baseball is a game of nuance. A few steps to the right or left, just because you know where a batter will hit the ball or would most likely hit the ball. Yeah, and it's a game of just little inches. Yeah, it's really fascinating. They used to think that back in the days of the Greeks and the Romans, that the gods bestowed upon you the flow, the power. The gods must have granted so and so Achilles the ability to run fast. Well, it was not granted by the gods, it was granted by flow. It was granted by this ability that we have as humans to do these amazing things. Yeah. Oh. Oh. If anybody's yeah. Well, when you I that's how I learned to kip, a pull-up, was that, it's like once I just started to kip a pull-up instead of try to, it's like, "Oh, well, that's how you do it." It's kinda like if you swing your body and get your body, "Oh, well, that's how I got up there." It's like, I didn't think about it. Like, yeah, that line in Bull Durham, "Don't think, just throw." It's like, yeah, don't think, just throw. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mhm. Oh, uh, yeah, yeah. Mhm. No. Yeah. No, no. Well, it's a rich experience, and it can be rich in many different ways. For like Alex Honnold and his ascent of El Cap, it was something he aspired to. And so, have you done Murph in CrossFit? Is that something that you've accomplished there? And Murph's, pretty badass. If you've done it. Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah. So that Yeah. It took me 4 days, but I know. You aspire to do something like that. Anybody's done a marathon, it's like, you didn't just go, "I think I'll do a marathon next week." It's like you worked for it. And so whether you did it or not, well, there were moments on that course where you're going, "Okay, I'm sort of spacing out here," because you kind of had to. And those are moments of flow. And if you could do that, like for the whole, how many hours it took you to do a marathon, or how long it took you to do Murph, that's pretty much your challenge skill ratio, in a perfect fit with Murph for the marathon. But there were moments when you're doing those things, and where you spaced out, that's flow. That's where you're just in the zone and you're doing it and you're going, "Oh, thank goodness that was a shorter period of time than I thought it was." That's just where everything's kind of clicking, and your biomechanics and your biochemicals and your bioelectrical, it just clicking, and you're in a zone. And being in the zone is a good place to go. And when you're in a zone learning at school, for example, and it's a focus sort of thing, that's experiential. That's the best place to learn, because you're doing it, and you're doing it at a level where you've never done it quite as intently or focused before, and the content is coming in almost as easily as breath goes in and out. It just goes to the neurons and stays there because you're just not thinking. Don't think, just throw. You're throwing strikes. Um, it stays with you. It just subconsciously just sticks. And that's the best place to be. It's hard to stay. You can only do that about 2 hours a day at the most. So what do you do with the other 4 to 5 hours you're in school is the problem. But yeah, when you get that going, it is a finite resource. We do not just go into flow. We have to kind of be there. We have to be, kind of ready to go, kind of be in the right place. The experience has to match the triggers, and then we can only go there about 2 and 10 hours. But for those 2 hours, it's certainly worth 8 hours of mundane study and book reading and sitting and just laboriously going over information. It's about that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah, that's the point. What we have to do is redefine that there is no finish line in schools or in learning or in life. Um, I'd like to just mention this one. I came across this one a couple of years ago. Well, actually, about 20 years ago with my triathlon. Um, there's there's targets and goals. It says I have a goal to do, but I think a goal is sort of like an end. And I learned that if you're going to do a race, run past the finish line because if you run to the finish line, you always kind of end up like short of it going, oh God, there's the finish line. I got to make it. So it wasn't a goal, it's a target. So my target is the finish line. And all those little things I do, like the runs and the rides and the swims I did, and the speed work and the long runs I did for endurance, those were goals. The target was the finish line of a certain race, which meant to me that the targets are always movable. One race after another, one year after another. Targets are movable, and the goals are things I do along the way. So the goal of school is to learn certain things along the way. And then the targets are, say, finish 8th grade, get to high school. Then the target would be get to junior year because junior year is when you get serious about thinking about college or what's next. And then the next target would be get my diploma. But I'm the goals to get there would be this, that. And then after that, of course, my target would be college or something like a vocational, or maybe I just want to. I hitchhiked through Europe for 6 months after high school. That was my target. After that, my goals were to get enough money to get there. And then when I got back, my goals changed because my target changed. And so my life just proceeds forward, not after high school. My goal was to get out of high school and then get out of high school and go, well, what am I going to do now? So you're always learning on that too. My target is to get this class done, but my goals along the way are to learn this, that, and this. And so it sort of changes the point of view. Go ahead. Sure. And they make it all up. Yeah. Yeah. But the grunt work's the work. It's where all the fun is. It's where all the glow is. Uh-huh. Yeah. Mhm, mhm. Uh-huh. Yeah. Mhm. Mm. Mm, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, it are you if it depends on the situation. If you're really into, like, speaking about detailed subjects and you go from one subject to another and it just seems to match and you're in that focus area, it's not like you're in a sustained state so much as it ebbs and flows. So, the level of focus can kind of go down but go back up. For example, Alex Honnold climbing El Cap, he wasn't in a hypnotic state per se, um, but his level of focus was extremely high. There were some pitches that were easier than others, but when he had to turn up the juice and really focus, um, he did it. So yeah, you could stay in that state. It's kind of like today rocked. I had a great time talking about two very detailed subjects, which I love to talk about. And during those 3.5 hours I was talking about them, for about 2 of those hours, you were like nails. You were dead on. That kind of thing. Flow state, you just have one of those good days where you go home and you're just going, "Yeah, that just was awesome." That's flow state. I have them when I do a lot of performing in classes, and when I have a really good performance day, and I got students saying, "No, it just rocked," and it just felt good. That's a flow state day for me. I know it was. It's not all day, but it's a good majority of the day where it just rocked for me. Yeah, yeah. That happened. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mhm. Great. Mhm. Yeah. Um, well, I assume you're probably talking to people who know what you're talking about, and they know what they're listening to, which means you better know what you're talking about. And then and so when you're speaking, then they're agreeing or you can tell that you're jiving with your audience. And so that's risk. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, no, I assume the risk is that you want to connect with these people. You want to have this good conversation, and the risk is that it may not go so good. And it's going great. I mean, it's going like, wow, right, this is really great connection. I'm pulling information out so easy, stuff that I even forgot I knew. And here it comes. This is great. And they're getting it, and I'm getting it. Yeah. It could have been a really flat conversation. That's a risk, but it wasn't. It was a great one. Yeah. With a sense of control. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That it's it. Everything you say is pertinent and enlightening, and it's just going great. It's just yeah, mhm, yeah, absolutely, yeah, yeah. Well, that would be, in a group situation and yourself too, you're listening to them and their questions or you're seeing what they're giving you back, and they're listening to you, and that would be group flow. They're hearing you quite clearly. Yeah. And, and, yeah. Yeah, always say yes. Yes, and yes, and. Yeah. 25. Yeah. Yes. Right. Mhm. Yeah, 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 yeah. Every good improv artist knows yes and yes and. No but kills the topic. Yeah, yes and always goes. Yeah, so it's really important, and that will keep a flow state. Always keep your circuits up. Yeah. Well, that's the last one, and it's green. It's a silver color because creativity is overarching everything. Always arching everything. Yeah. Creativity's everything. Yeah. It's overarching on everything too. Very important. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. 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 Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And when those things are happening, you got a flow state, a group flow state for sure. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Uh, as far as the second part goes, um, as far as second parts go, they are well, the flow states, and then let me think here. Well, the way the flow state goes is you can't once you go into flow, you have to go back into recovery, and so you have to kind of give it a break. You have to give yourself a nice little break, and that's where serotonin and oxytocin go into, and then into struggle. You have to have the struggle. The struggle is the problem, so you create the problem itself. In your case, the lectures or the talks you were doing. In the other case, Alex Honnold, LCAP, things like that. And then you have to release. Yeah, so yep, your recovery, after you do a flow thing, you go into recovery, and you just that's like anything. And then you go back to the struggle itself. So let's go into another lesson. Or we're talking about another lesson. We're going to prepare ourselves for what's coming next. Whatever it is, it's not necessarily in the same time. You're in school. You know there's going to be one, and then there's a release. You just kind of prepare for it, and then get ready for this. You don't want to go into struggle. Let's go flow. Then you go to flow, and that would be like tomorrow let's talk about this lesson. And you set it up really well. And then you go into flow and then you just recover. And so it's a recovery, struggle, release, flow. And it's always in that cycle. There's a predictable cycle. And it goes with predictable brain waves and it goes with predictable neurochemicals. And so you can't really induce it any other way. Yeah. Um, yeah. Definitely. Yeah. We can talk about that for a minute. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That would be excellent. Yeah, it gets a little complicated with the neurochemicals and the neural waves, and the Flow Genome Project is excellent for that. So yeah, get that for you. Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. I'd love to talk more about this. It's fascinating stuff.